Hi, welcome to Current Issues with Dr. Kirk Meighoo. Today is our Indian Arrival Day special, and here is a memo for the 29th of May, 2018. Challenges for Indian Arrival Day. This year's commemoration of the 173rd anniversary of Indian arrival to Trinidad has had some notable controversies being raised. A couple of weeks ago, the issue of firing lecturers at the University of Trinidad and Tobago sparked discussion of ethnic cleansing in state institutions under the PNM. This is because it appears that Indians were vastly overrepresented among those that were fired. About 70%, according to Dr. Kumar Mahabir, who is a lecturer at the university, who was fired. At the same time, according to Dr. Mahabir, Indians make up only 30% of the staff. Now, we've not been able to verify those particular figures, but if they are correct, there is a serious imbalance that needs to be addressed. There has also been the replacement of Indians at the highest level of UTT's administration with non-Indians. This includes the head of education, the acting president and provost, and VP of human resources. The distribution of state housing and state funds are also obviously skewed toward non-Indians. The debate has to center around whether this is deliberate, and if it is claimed that it is not, well, what can the justifiable explanation for these discrepancies be? At the same time, however, at an internal level, there has been the issue between the Mahasabha, Kamla Prasad Bisesa, and a Muslim OJT trainee. This has raised issues about politics, religious tolerance, and Hindu-Muslim relations, although the trainee in question was of African and Arab descent. It has also raised the question of whether Hindus should automatically give their support or withdraw their support from particular political parties. My view on all this is that Indians have made great strides toward being recognized as the integral and inescapable part of Trinidad that they in fact are. However, the game of ethnic spoils in government, the dangers of black racism and Creole nationalism, a Christian bias against Hinduism and Islam, and the isolation of Port of Spain and the Western Peninsula from the rest of the country are issues that have to be dealt with to ensure that Indians' rightful place in Trinidad and Tobago is recognized and accepted by all. Today, I'm going to take your calls to get your input on the issues facing the country on this Indian Arrival Day. Our telephone number at the station is 223-1601. That's 223-1601. We're going to take a break now, and we'll be right back with your calls. Good evening. So, to start off our discussion on Indian Arrival Day and the current issues, in fact, I want to speak about more of a perennial issue, not one of the controversies that are going on right now, and there are many, but this is important as a background, which is the idea of the place of Indians in Trinidad and Tobago. You know, for instance, my son is in school, he's in primary school, and even in the social studies textbooks, the way they talk about Indians in Trinidad and Tobago is as if we were newcomers after the Africans and the Europeans, of course, and the Amerindians who were there before everybody else. But it makes us, makes Indians seem to be sort of interlopers, and that's the way it is portrayed. And when I say interlopers, you know, the people who came into a society that was already functioning and having to find our place here. But that's not really the case. The fact is that we did not really have slavery in Trinidad. There was only a small amount of slaves at the time. When emancipation came, there were only 18,000 slaves in Trinidad, pradial slaves, which is the agricultural slaves. Unlike, say, Jamaica, which had 360,000 slaves, right? Or even Tobago, which is so small that had 11,000 slaves. And how many Indians came to Trinidad? It was 144,000 Indians came. Right? Think of that number. 18,000 Afro-Trini slaves, let's put it that way, and 144,000 Indians came. Because most of the Afro-Trinidadians that did come, that are here in Trinidad today, mostly claim as free people in the 19th century after slavery. So that's why many Afro-Trinidadians, when you reach their grandparents, sometimes their parents, you'll see that it's from Barbados or St. Vincent or Grenada, and that, you know, my family, for example, the Meihoos have been here for 6 generations in Trinidad, which is longer than most Afro-Trinis. We built villages in Trinidad, right, where there were none. We built places. So we are the very characterization of us as latecomers to the society undermines our claim that this is our home. And I had to deal with this recently when somebody who really should know better, an activist, was claiming how Hindus were not patriotic to Trinidad and Tobago. And I had to correct them with these very facts, because this person, who was an Afro-Trinidadian, I mean, her own ancestry only goes back a couple of generations to one of the small islands. And the reason why I'm saying this is not because there needs to be some sort of way to oppose the Indian groups to the non-Indian groups or whatever, but it's just that we don't, as a rule, the whole country, we are so uneducated about the way our society developed, our history, that people sort of make up stories, right? They make up stories about the history of this country, about who suffered more, and in the story they make up, right, Indians are seen as outsiders. And that's one of the most important things about this holiday, about this Indian Arrival Day holiday. You know, we don't celebrate the end of indenture, right? Even though this year is the 100th anniversary of the last indentured laborer that came to Trinidad, and that's important to commemorate. But it's not like the Africans who commemorate emancipation. That's very important. It's important for all of us, right? But Arrival Day, Indian Arrival Day, is something different. What we are celebrating is our presence and the legitimacy of our presence and our long presence here. And as I said, our presence here is longer than most Afro-Trinidadians, right? So it's really just to get our history straight, to get our place straight here. It's not for antagonism, I want to put it, but it's to be accurate. And we have a caller on the line from Port of Spain. Good evening. Good evening.
So good evening, Dr. Meihooo. You know, what you have just said, it's really refreshing to hear, because I've never heard that before. I always thought that, you know, because of slavery, they were here before the Indians. And now that you're saying, from historical point of view, and I suppose you're a learned gentleman, that, you know, a lot of these Africans, they came from the other islands. Now, I know quite a few who have backgrounds even from Venezuela.
Yeah.
So it's good to hear this, and it's really educational. So I thank you very much.
Well, thanks
Good
for
night.
thanks for that. Yeah, and that's the thing. It is quite amazing that these facts about our history are not known. So let me repeat that for people who might not have got it. There were only 18,000 slaves in Trinidad. I say only 18 because when you look at the rest of the Caribbean, like Jamaica, for example, it's 360,000 slaves, which is the whole number of Afro-Trinidadians that exist today. Tobago, which is so much smaller than Trinidad. Trinidad is 5,000 square kilometers and Tobago is 300 square kilometers. I mean, we're more than 10 times, we're almost 20 times the size of Tobago. And they had 11,000 slaves, because Tobago had slavery, that's for sure. It had that plantation slavery. Most of the slaves in Trinidad, when the French came here for the 14 years, there were plantations coming in, but it never developed in the same way. So we never really developed a slave society in Trinidad. That never developed, like in Barbados, like in Antigua, like in Jamaica. In those countries, if you go out in the countryside, you'll see white people with their big estate houses, and the families that live around the estates are really descendants of the slaves who were slaves on that estate. Just like, in Trinidad, the Indian villages around the estate, very often it's by the people who are indentured on the nearby estates, right? But we don't have that. We don't really have that in Trinidad. What you have is the villages, like let's say Enterprise, which is close to where I'm from. Well, Enterprise was founded by Vincentians. They came here as free people, not as slaves. So their history in Trinidad is as free people. And that's why you see names like Freedom Street or Liberty, or sometimes you see Wilberforce. William Wilberforce was the MP who freed the slaves in the British Empire. So it's free villages from immigrants. That's where the Afro-Trinidadian community is largely descended from. Whereas the Indians have a much longer history. And I'll give you the numbers again. There were roughly 144,000. Sometimes the numbers are disputed, but it's around 144,000 indentured laborers. So compare 144,000 as opposed to 18,000. Right? It was a lot of us, and we were here for generations. And if you can trace back your family history, which I recommend that we all know how far back we are in this country, because it's important to claim our space here, because Indians are made to seem as outsiders still after 173 years here. Let me tell you, some people could be descendants of Vincentians, right, one generation removed, and they could feel like they are entitled to Trinidad and Tobago more than an Indian. It's because of this mythology that is perpetuated in the school system. It's perpetuated in our social studies books. And so many inaccuracies are peddled there. And with this whole Concordat issue that has recently come up, it's really struck me that this control that the PNM took of our education system through the Concordat really spread these misunderstandings of our history. These misunderstandings, because the religious schools were the ones. The religious schools started education in Trinidad and Tobago, not the state, not the government. Right? It was the Presbyterian schools, the Catholic schools, the Anglican schools, and then for a very short time, the Hindus started to build schools in the 1950s. Right? And I say a short time because when Eric Williams came, one of his big campaigns was to stop these religious schools from dominating the education system. And why? Because they were teaching something different from what Williams thought should be taught. Williams used the educational system to be a tool of integration, right? Which is that sounds nice, integration, great, we should all get along, we're not disputing that at all. But integration can also be pernicious in that what it means is destroying the Indian ancestral heritage. Right, to create, which is what the whole there should be no Mother India, no Mother Africa, no Mother China thing, what no Mother Europe idea was about. That we should forget all of the past and just embrace this new identity, which was a mistake. And when we had our first Prime Minister of Indian descent, Basdeo Pandey, he made some very, very important moves against that. And not only for the Indian side, because, again, Mr. Pandey represented a different stream to that PNM Creole ideology. And when I talk about a Creole ideology, I mean this idea of mixing together and forgetting your past. Right? This other ideology that existed before the PNM, because our first government in Trinidad was with Albert Gomes, Norman Tang, Ajoda Singh, Victor Bryan, and Roy Joseph, which was a Syrian, an Afro-Trinidadian, a Portuguese, a Chinese, a Hindu, an amazing reflection of what the society was. Right? This was politics before the PNM. Right? And that's the type of government we produced. And Williams wanted to erase all that. So in school, we don't learn about Albert Gomes anymore. We don't learn about these people anymore. We don't learn about politics before the PNM. People believe politics started in 1956 when the PNM came. And that is not true. And that's because the PNM came and controlled the education system. But this is what Mr. Pandey came in 1995, Basdeo Pandey came, and he allowed Hindus to build more schools. He allowed Baptists to build schools for the first time. Right? He had things like the Orisha Marriage Act as well, and the Spiritual Baptist Marriage Act. More autonomy for Tobago, because the PNM had this idea of this unitary state, so even Tobago wouldn't have autonomy. That whole ideology, that whole Creole nationalist ideology, that everything should be one. There should, all the races should just mix. All the religions should essentially fade away, I suppose. That idea needs to be challenged explicitly, intellectually and politically, and this Indian Arrival Day holiday was part of it, because although Patrick Manning, we must give him credit, was the first one to put the Indian Arrival Day holiday in 1995, they wanted to call it simply Arrival Day, and it was called simply Arrival Day. And in the report they got, where Indian Arrival Day celebration was recommended and an Arrival Day holiday, there was also a recommendation that a Spiritual Baptist holiday be put in, and the PNM rejected that. The PNM under Eric Williams, who was a historian of slavery, also rejected Emancipation Day and keeping Columbus Day. So it's a very curious history on that PNM side about this Creole nationalism that they put, which is everybody just be one and don't show your differences, right? And what the Pandey government represented was celebrating our differences, not being afraid of our differences. And this Indian Arrival Day holiday, he said that no, it won't be Arrival Day anymore, a generic one. It's on May 30th, right? Which means Indian Arrival Day. It's commemorating a specific date. This does not negate the arrival of others to this country, but it is a specific date. It's similar to like when there's a debate in America, as to whether you should say Merry Christmas on December 25th. I think it's absurd that people say Happy Holidays. It's December 25th, it's Christmas. It should not take away from any other people or religion that it's a Christian holiday. That's what it is, and you can't be vexed at the history. And this is our history, and these are our historical moments. And as a country, this needs to be recognized. And as Indians in Trinidad, we really need to champion this understanding as well, because if we don't, other people are not going to do it for us, right? And we're not doing it in an aggressive way to denigrate others or to promote a supremacy over others. This is reimagining what this country is and how we can live together in harmony rather than suppressing our diversity. Well, let's take a break now, and we'll come back with your calls and comments afterward. And now we come to the SMH segment, which is Scratching My Head, where we look at some of the confusing and absurd happenings in our country that just makes us wonder. So here's SMH for today, 29th of May 2018. Jokey judges. Yesterday, a High Court judge, Kevin Rancharan, was charged with driving under the influence after he was involved in a collision. The judge is actually out on bail up to today. The Judicial and Legal Services Commission, which is in charge of appointing and disciplining judges, have not yet involved themselves in the issue of possible disciplinary measures. And this is not the first time the judge has compromised the judiciary. Newspaper reports and evidence on social media apparently show that the judge posted a series of sexually charged tweets on his Twitter account soon after being appointed. The tweets included remarks about women's bodies and pornography. And even as assistant registrar, he displayed irresponsible behavior by not appearing in a preliminary inquiry against the late Selwyn Robocop Alexis, a notorious gangster, despite giving the DPP assurances that he would attend. And these are all reported in the newspapers. Not only was he appointed to be a judge despite this, he was appointed at the same time as the former Chief Magistrate Margaret Ayres Caesar, which has caused a serious crisis in the magistracy and the judiciary in general. This is yet another failing of the Chief Justice and the Judicial and Legal Services Commission, which he heads. How can the body which is supposed to discipline judges dispense its function when it needs to be disciplined itself? As a first step, the Chief Justice needs to step down. But instead, he has taken another 6 weeks vacation leave, granted by our new president, who is also a former judge, despite it being quite apparent that he is not entitled to such leave normally. So who will judge the judges? I'm still scratching my head on this one. Well, thanks again for joining me this week. I'll see you next week, Tuesday at 8 p.m. and repeated on Sunday at 4 p.m. I hope you and your families enjoy your Indian Arrival Day and Corpus Christi holidays. Bye for now.